All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started, knowing to be respectful of everyone's time. So wonderful to have you all here tonight. I'm going to introduce myself, and then my colleague is going to introduce herself, and then we'll get going. So my name is Sarah Wheeler-Chingos. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an associate dean here in the admissions office at Bowdoin. I am really fortunate tonight to also be sharing the screen with my colleague, Meg. Meg, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Meg Brooks Swift, and I also am an Associate Dean of Admissions here at Bowdoin. I've been here for a number of years. I've also worked in college admissions at another school, so it's fun to be able to share this based on our experience as parents. So I think Sarah might talk about that a little bit more, but we hope this is going to be helpful information for you this evening.
Great. Thanks, Meg. So Meg and I are going to be splitting the talking tonight. There's a lot of information, a lot of things to pass along. So while one of us is speaking, the other one is going to be available to try to respond to any questions that you might like to pose to us. We'd like to ask that you use the Q&A function in order to pose any questions that you have. So if something is confusing or doesn't make sense, or if you have an additional question about it, please don't hesitate to put that question right in the Q&A, and we are going to respond just as quickly and as succinctly as we can. We do know from doing this last year that many more questions come in than we are able to respond to in the very short period of time that we have. So we apologize in advance if we can't get to all of the questions, but you can always reach out to us if you have additional questions at the end of this webinar. So what we're going to try to do is, and we all may also, if questions come in, there are some larger themes. We may hold those questions till the end. And then for those of you who remain on for the second half of the program, we'll try to get to some of those questions more directly. So, as Meg alluded to as well, we kind of joke when we were getting this, when we were asked to do this webinar tonight, and in the office, we kind of joked because we thought our dean had asked us to do it, because we are also the two people in the office for whom we are seeing this both as professionals as well as parents. Between Meg and I, we have been through this college application process or are going through this college application process 4 times in the last 3 years. And so we speak both from the parent perspective as well as professionals in the admissions realm. To get started, what I'd like to do is give you an overview of what we plan to cover in the next half an hour or so. So what we hope to share with you tonight is a very broad overview of the college application process. This is not Bowdoin specific, but rather it's an opportunity to try to give you sort of a larger framework of understanding as you embark on this process. We're going to start really broadly with an overview of some common topics that we're talking about right now, and then we're going to dig in a little bit further on particular issues, including things like testing, application rounds, applying for financial aid, and holistic admissions. If we do this pretty right, we should cover the material in about 35 minutes or so, and then we should have time for your questions after that. So, as I'm sure you already know, college admissions is in the news a lot lately. As you probably have heard in years past, we had the Varsity Blues scandal a few years ago, and we're still figuring out the ongoing fallout from that. But much more top of mind recently for us these days is the impending Supreme Court decision on affirmative action practices in admissions. We're also trying to gain an understanding, we're just on the starting edge of this, of the ways that things like ChatGPT and artificial intelligence software might come into play in the application process in the coming years. These are just some of the issues that my colleagues and I are talking about and thinking about a lot very regularly. In addition to that, we're also trying to think about some of the trends that have a more immediate impact on you and on your junior during the application and admissions process. So one topic that I'm sure you're hearing a lot about is testing, very broadly, and perhaps largely due to the pandemic and its associated fallout. We are continuing to see movement away from required testing as a part of many college and university application processes. We're also seeing an upward trend in the number of seniors who choose to apply to an early round and for a first choice college. There's a college counselor that we know that we work with who recently told us that she now has upwards of 90% of her students choosing to apply in one of the early application rounds. And while we're still working to understand the long-term impacts of the pandemic on our students, we definitely acknowledge the disrupted academic and social experience of our students over the past few years. We know and understand, again, both as parents as well as professionals, that the pandemic is going to have profound, lasting impacts on the academic, extracurricular, and social and service opportunities available for our students. We see and we understand that. We know that for your students as well, this transition between middle and high school, your 8th and 9th grade years during the pandemic was probably really rough. Many of your children started high school virtually or going to school every other day or in person, but masked so that their teachers didn't get a chance to get to know their faces right away. So many schools had to toggle back and forth between going in person and then back to online teaching, and many had to change their grading structures to accommodate these various changes. Teachers were struggling, we know that. They're trying to figure out what it means to deliver curriculum in a virtual setting, and students were really struggling to get access to both the teachers and the resources necessary to really help facilitate a productive and meaningful transition to high school. We also understand that it continues to have impacts in the extracurricular activities such as sports, band, chorus, activity clubs, other things. These all took a big hit during the pandemic. So it's good that the 2022-2023, so this junior year, academic year, has definitely looked more normal for most schools and for many people, but we are still seeing significant lasting mental health challenges on both high school and the college campuses. And we're thinking a lot and thinking deeply about how to calibrate our admissions reading in order to really understand this very changed and very uniquely challenging moment in college admissions. On the positive side of it, if there is a silver lining to the pandemic, we would say that it is that we're still seeing a really strong uptick and very creative virtual offerings at colleges. And we think that's going to continue to be an offering that is something that we go on for and utilize more expansively in the years to come. We're providing expanded opportunities both for you and for your students to explore and better understand the breadth of the college application process. Okay, so that's a quick walkthrough at like the macro level. And so now what we're going to try to do is jump right into the actual process. How do we even start this? You're 9 to 12 months out. So the first step is really to kind of identify what it is that's really interesting to your student. Before you actually dive into any action steps, the first thing that we actually advocate for is that you take some time to encourage your student to actually look inward. Encourage them to really think broadly about what it is they want out of their college education in order to know where to go for their college education. What is important to him, to her, to they? What do they think? What do they like about their high school? What do they hope to find in college? What are the pieces of it? What are the things that they're looking forward to? When you talk to 16 and 17-year-olds, some of them are going to have really specific ideas, but many of them are only going to have very, very vague ideas. Regardless of that, both the specific and the vague, be aware of the fact that they're most likely going to change and evolve over the course of the next 9 to 10, 12 months or so. This is really fine. It's all part of this journey, but it's important that we kind of give this a framework so that you start asking the questions in order to establish a baseline from which to launch. Okay, so the first step, let's try to make a list. There are a number of resources that can help your student really approach this task. Many of them are online, so you may look to resources such as the College Board, the FISC Guide, Naviance, Niche, other providers that ask a series of questions that can help your student really start to identify schools that might be appealing to them based on very, very broad or very specific interests. It may help them identify, would you rather have a research university, or would a smaller college be a better fit for the student? Might help them think about whether they want to be in the Northeast where they can get a foot of snow on a February evening, or whether they would like to be somewhere a little bit warmer or somewhere further away. They should also be seeking out the advice of the trusted adults around them. So they should be looking to talk to guidance counselors, to make connections with the college counselors, to talk to teachers, to talk to family members, community members, and even older students from their high school or that they know who recently completed this process, and solicit all of these ideas to start to get a framework. Each person is going to be able, that they talk to, is going to be able to offer different perspective and different level of expertise that's going to help guide and inform them in the formation of this list that they have to produce. So if they aren't sure where to start to break down their interests and are feeling kind of overwhelmed by all of the options, which is completely natural, and certainly my kids were, there are a few guiding questions that we try to give students that might help the students hone in on key interests. So one question you might ask is, do they have a specific academic interest or goal? Some students are going to be really, really clearly defined in what it is that they hope to pursue in college. It might be focused in a specific area. It might be education. It might be finance. It might be nursing. Or are they somebody who has found that in their high school experience, they love the study of language as much as they love the study of science, in which case maybe a liberal arts approach where you don't have to declare a major until the end of your sophomore year might be a better way to go. Trying to get them to think about some of these questions is going to help direct the type of academic setting that they will choose to pursue. Is geography important? Both not just the region of the country or the world, but also the type of community that a student might be considering. Are they happiest in a city? Would they rather be in a more rural area? Or is suburban, something in between, going to be a good approach for? What's important to them in terms of campus culture, student life? Are they someone who finds themselves at their best in really small classes? Or would they prefer to be a little more anonymous and attend large lecture style classes? Are they interested in Greek life? What about sports? Would they like to be at a school that offers Division I sports, either to play or that they could go cheer for? Or maybe they would rather be in a smaller school setting where they can have a chance to play multiple sports over the course of their year, in which case a Division III school might be a better fit for them. Are they interested in being in a residential setting, in a residential community, or do you think that they would rather have a chance to commute to school? Does weather matter? Again, snow. And how far away from home do they want to be? In addition to all of this, there's also the question of financial aid. We're going to talk more about this later. Meg's going to address it a little bit more, but it is an important element to do research on as you think about all of these lists of schools. Finding out what a school can offer, or doesn't offer. These are all important questions to really push your child to get information and to understand early on in the process, as it's all going to factor in later on. And keep in mind, again, the one thing that I mentioned before that I think is most important in all of this is that a young person's interests are bound to change, and the career path is bound to change over the course of the next several years, and even as they go through this application process. That's okay. That's part of this. So digging a little bit deeper into some of these prior questions, there are different types of institutions that your student might choose to consider. These include things like liberal arts schools, where, again, as I mentioned, you may take a broad breadth of classes in your first few years before you hone in on an academic area of interest in your final 2 years. There are things like research universities, where you might apply directly into a specific program of study. There are historically Black colleges and universities called HBCUs. Things like single gender colleges, technical universities, religiously affiliated colleges, service academies. There's so many different possibilities. And it might be that your student chooses to apply broadly across a number of these different types of institutions. That's great. It's perfectly fine. But it's important that your student understands all the different offerings that are out there for them to consider. And then within each one of these types of institutions, there are different academic offerings as well. For example, some schools have very specific distribution requirements. And so, for example, if your student doesn't really love studying foreign language, make sure they're not selecting a school that they're going to apply to early decision that has a language requirement. So you're going to want to do a little bit of research once you start to get some ideas so that you can understand the various features of an institution and how they might align with the academic goals that for your child's college experience. As part of this initial research, again, it's important that your student consider an understanding of the financial aid offerings at each school. There's almost always a lot of information available on websites, student aid websites for each individual school that helps spell out the process. But it's important that they start to think about, is merit aid a part of the package? Does the school that you're applying to package aid as loans or as grants? What's the average loan debt for students at graduation? It's a very fair question. A lot of websites will have that information. Does the college meet a student's full financial need? These are all really important factors to consider. Students should also have a balance of selectivity on their lists. We talk a little bit about selectivity, and I'll go into it a little bit more in depth. But colleges range from admitting as few as 5% of students to admitting 100% students who apply to the school. Your students list should ideally have sort of a broad range of selectivity rates. A friend of Meg's, I recently we were talking, and she mentioned that they use this guidance counselor that she knows uses sort of like ski slope. Again, going back to the New England, I think the theme is snow here tonight, but going back to the theme of thinking about a ski slopes. And so, some double black diamonds, some really challenging schools that you might apply to. There should be a few of those on the list. And then maybe some black diamonds, challenging a reach, yes, but possible. And then some, what do you call it? Some blue squares, which might be, something that would be a little bit intermediate. So 50-50 shot at getting in terms of selectivity. And then also some green circles. So ones that you feel fairly certain that your student will get into, and also be a school that they will still love. So that just be sure that whatever schools are on the list are schools that the student is really genuinely excited about. And so you want to be realistic in terms of thinking about sort of the variety of levels of select. So I want to take just a minute to go into a little bit more information about selectivity. When we talk about selectivity, what we are talking about is the acceptance rate, or the percentage of applicants that are admitted to an institution in any given year. It does not actually indicate anything about the institution, the specific institution, just that if it has a selectivity rating, that it has more applications from students than it's actually able to admit and enroll in a particular class. So if you're looking at like FISC guides or any other guides, you're probably going to see an admit rate or an admission rate listed as part of the school profiles. And that's going to give you an indication of the selectivities. What it's important to see is that you're going to see that most colleges and universities accept well over half of their applicants. It is really actually just generally a small number of schools that really grab the headlines with their extremely low admission rates. And to that point, it's really important to note a few things around the topic of selectivity. So one thing to note is that highly selective colleges are unlikely for almost any applicant. This can be hard to hear, but it's important. Highly selective colleges are highly unlikely for any applicant. Your child might be incredibly well qualified for the school by every conceivable measure, and they still may have over a 90% chance of not being admitted. And while your student may end up having a really tip-top choice school that they're so excited about and that they feel would be a really, really great school for them to attend, keep in mind that there's no one perfect school. And it's best to really try to encourage your student as a parent and as a caregiver to encourage them to develop a realistic group of schools in which your student could potentially thrive. And finally, it's really important to keep remembering that a college admissions decision is not a reflection at all of an applicant's worth or ability to be really genuinely successful in college. Admissions decisions are made by schools, and they reflect what a particular college is seeking in a specific context in a specific year. Schools seek to create a really diverse community, intellectually, socially, culturally, idealistically, ideologically, and they may admit based on those specific contexts. Okay. All right, so away from selectivity for a minute. How are we doing? So at this point, your student has done some soul searching, they've done some navel gazing, they've talked to some trusted others, they've researched a few options that might seem appealing, and they've got a couple of schools in mind. So now what happens? The next step we think is really fun. I found as a parent, it was really fun. And I hope that you will find the same thing. And that is to really start to visit and get to know some of these schools on the list. As I mentioned before, silver lining of the pandemic has been that colleges and universities have really beefed up their virtual offerings. So that means that your first round of research in schools now can actually take place from the comfort of your home with no money invested at a time that works for you and for your family and for your student. It's actually a really exciting change, we think, that has happened just in the past few years. And is likely to continue to grow. So it's great that you're thinking about the process so early on and can set sort of an unhurried goal. What Meg and I have talked about and what we really feel like is, if you try to do maybe 2 visits per month virtually throughout the course of the spring, which would put you in a really good place to refine the list later in the summer in terms of places you might want to visit in person. And as you look at each school, you may choose to start with a virtual information session, but then also check out what other options are available. Schools may offer virtual class visits, informal conversations with current students, virtual tours where a student actually walks you all the way around the campus, and so much more. The most important part of these early virtual visits is actually to really just encourage your student to kind of be conscientious and to take the time afterwards to find some way to take some notes, whether it's a journal or on their phone or whatever, about what they saw. What did they like? What did they dislike? Gut reaction really matters at this point in the search. Could they see themselves potentially at this institution? That gut reaction piece of it is really important. This is going to be their home for the next 4 years. And they're going to have a lifetime connection to this institution. So you want it to be something that they feel really good about. So after you've cast this wide net for the virtual visits and you start to get tailored down a little bit more, you can start to narrow it down and create a realistic and balanced list for in-person visits over the course of the next couple of months. So, and as you begin to identify these schools that you're most excited about, you're going to want to start looking a little bit deeper to begin to understand actually what the expectations are for each applicant. And with that, I'm going to step aside and turn it over to Meg to talk about testing and onward.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So tests, we know this is a topic that leads to great anxiety and stress among students. When we say tests, we are referring to the SAT or the ACT or even the AP tests, which conclude a year of an AP class. And in the old days, most schools required tests. Bowdoin is actually test optional, has been since 1969, but we were joined in this world during COVID because, as everyone probably knows, many of the testing sites shut down and colleges were forced to try to figure out what to do about this part of their application process that was no longer possible. And so we are seeing in this day, and I think it's fair to say that every year things change a little bit more, but colleges fall into 3 different categories as it relates to testing. We have tests that are required. And I know there are many schools that have been optional in the last few years who are switching to a required test next year for the 2023-2024 academic year. We also have schools that have gone test optional. Many were test optional before, and some have decided, having gone this path, that it works really well, and they feel as though they get enough information about the student when it relates to their academic accomplishments through the transcript or through the writing and the way the teachers are writing about them through the recommendation. There is also a relatively new movement for test-free. Sometimes this is called test-blind, where a school won't even consider a test. And one thing I think is important for you all as you're starting this process to appreciate that this is a really important question for you to be asking of the schools that your student is most interested in. It is part of the research process to be asking what the philosophy of that particular school is in regards to testing. It's something you can ask in information sessions, and it is also important to remember that some policies may even allow a student to submit certain tests, i.e. the AP exams, and not the SAT or the ACT. So application rounds, I think it can feel as though the cycle of admissions goes on and on and on. So we wanted to try to break this down to give you a little bit of a sense of what that looks like. So some schools, and this applies to many big public state institutions, have rolling applications, and the deadlines begin as early as September. Then you have many schools who fall into the opportunity of early applications. These deadlines are typically in November. Some may be as early as October 15th. But early applications typically fall into two different areas. There's early decision, and that's a binding decision. So what that means is if you are applying early decision, you are saying, this is my number one school, this is where I want to be, and if I am admitted, I am matriculating there for the following fall. There's also an early action option, and this is non-binding, meaning if you are accepted, you are completely free to apply to other institutions. So this is a really important, as Sarah mentioned earlier, we know that large percentages of each high school class end up applying early. And it's really important to think through whether you want to apply to an early decision school or an early action school. I know from my own children, sometimes you walk on a campus and just immediately fall in love. And in that case, early decision may make sense. I know there are other students who visit multiple schools and never really feel as though there's one perfect school. They like a lot of them. That may be a better early action application. Some schools will actually offer both early decision and early action. So again, as you're doing your research, it's really important to think through what the school is saying about their application round. Then there is a regular application round. These are typically due sometime in January or February. Some of them may be a little bit earlier, especially flagship universities with a late fall deadline. And some have a earlier deadline if there's certain honors or scholarships programs that are provided. And then there's the long waiting season. Typically, you'll hear your results from regular applications, at least in March and into April. And then May 1st is what we look at as sort of the official decision day. And so many, not all institutions will require that a student makes their deposit or their confirmation at the school they plan to attend on May 1st. And so that's relevant as it relates to waitlist, because that's often if you are a waitlisted student and you're really excited to have a chance at that school you've been waitlisted, May 1st is typically around the time that that schools may move on their waitlist admissions offers. Financial aid, always a touchy and angst-provoking topic. One thing I will say as a start to this is Congress requires that all colleges and universities have a net price calculator on their website. This may be called a financial aid estimator or use a website called My Intuition. And what this is for allows you to go in with some basic financial information, tax form, and answer somewhere between 6 and 10 questions. And you will be provided with an estimated family contribution that's based upon your need. So it also can lead to a way for you to have a dialogue with a student aid office. So if the result that comes back on the estimated family contribution makes no sense to you, if you feel like it is completely out of whack with your financial situation, this would allow you the opportunity to have that conversation, ask specific questions, and get a better understanding of what the financial side of things will look like prior to either deciding what schools you're applying to, or at least which schools you actually apply. There are a number of forms that are required on the financial aid side. Everyone will be asked to complete what's called the FAFSA, which stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. This is for federal aid. It's available in October 1st of every year, and you are asked to pull up tax information from, it's typically now the prior year. Then there is also a form that the College Board puts out. This is the CSS profile, and it's used by many colleges and other scholarship programs to determine institutional aid. So that's different from federal aid, but it's aid that the college has, the university has to give out directly. Some schools may also require additional institutional financial aid forms, and that will be something that is made clear in the student aid on the student aid website or in the portal. Loans, this is something, there are lots of different directions that loans can go. And I think while getting the financial aid award letter may be up to a year away from most of you as junior families, I think the side of loans can be really overwhelming because there are federal loans, there are private loans, there's a subsidized loan, which means that you are not accruing interest while the student is still in school, typically at least half time. An unsubsidized loan means that you would be paying interest as soon as the funds are dispersed. And then it's important to look at the concept of grant aid. This is often called scholarship. And there are a number of different grants that are provided. And I know there was a question or so of this in the Q&A earlier, but different schools will have different approaches to grant aid. Merit-based is offered at some schools. Bowdoin does not offer merit aid, but where you may take into account specific SAT or ACT scores, or it may be awarded to, the top 5% of a class, or they're using some metric of the way the student has succeeded in high school to award aid. There are also athletic scholarships. Bowdoin is part of the NESCAC conference. We are Division III. We do not offer athletic scholarships, but if you are applying to schools that offer that, you should just be aware of what that looks like, what you're going to be required to provide as it comes to forms, and what might be offered as the athletic scholarship. And finally, there's need-based, and this is where Bowdoin is a need-based school. And what that means is we are looking at the need of the family, and essentially what we do is go through and assess the family's ability to pay, and the difference between the amount that the family can pay and the cost of the Bowdoin tuition, fees, room and board, everything is what will be provided as a grant or as a scholarship to the family. So I know financial aid can be incredibly tricky. I do encourage you to take advantage of those net price calculators because they can help illuminate what can be a really confusing part of the admissions process. Holistic admissions. This is a process that we at Bowdoin and a number of highly selective schools use, where we're really looking very comprehensively at a student. At Bowdoin, and I think you'll see at many different schools, we will accept a number of different applications. So whether you choose to use the Common Application, the Coalition on Score application, the QuestBridge application, or even an institutional application like the University of California system has a consortium application, we will accept those first three applications. It's really up to the preference of the student, which platform is most preferable as they are completing all the information. But regardless of which form you use, you will be asked for basically the same types of information. There's demographic information where you're entering your name, your high school, different awards you've got, whether that's, high honors at your school or a statewide music award or a MVP award in a sports league. We then look to sort of the activities, everything you're doing when you're not in the classroom. And I encourage students always to be creative with this. There's obviously the high school sanctioned ones, whether it's a varsity sport or the Model UN. But I also think it's important to think about how you are spending your time outside of class. So if you have a part-time job, by all means, that should be included in there. If you're really involved with a youth group, with your synagogue or your mosque or your church, you should include that. In this section of activities, you're going to be asked to define the category in which you're involved. Is this athletic? Is this environmental? Is it community service? You provide a description for both what you did as well as the type of what the program itself is, as along with how long you have done this. So is this 9th through 12th grade? Is this just 11th grade? And how much of a time commitment it is every week. You know, are you talking about an hour a week all year, or is this 15 hours a week during 3 months of the year? So you'll be able to quantify all of that. You then get to the personal essay, and in many ways, I think this leads to great intimidation on a student, that they think there is a perfect essay. My message would be there is no perfect essay. We are most interested in looking at a student and hearing their voice, not the voice of their parents or their English teacher, where they're talking about something of great importance to them. And this is something that we hope will be drafted early on, shared with folks to get some perspective, gone back and done edits, sort of the golden rule that make sure the spell check is correct, that the grammar makes sense, and that it's in the voice of that 16, 17, or 18-year-old. You also have the opportunity to ask for letters of recommendation. Typically, the school counselor will submit a letter along with the transcript, and then the student will ask, in Bowdoin's case, up to 2 teachers to write on their behalf. And this came up in a question earlier, but if you do not have 2 teachers and would prefer to supplement that second recommendation with a coach or an employer, you are welcome to do that. I think you should ask different schools as to whether additional recommendations are accepted. Some will say absolutely not. At Bowdoin, we always say if there's someone who you really want to ask to write a recommendation for you who can provide a different perspective than the earlier recommendations, by all means. But we don't want to get into a situation where we're accepting, 4 or 5 letters of recommendation from every applicant. And then finally, we will receive the transcript and the school profile. So the transcript, we're going to see the grades through 9th and 12th. And when we as admissions officers are looking at the applications, we're looking not only for the actual grade, but, and this may be even most important, but the types of classes they've taken and how they found rigor, how many classes they've taken, where they've chosen to push themselves in what disciplines. So that all is very helpful to us. We use the school profile. This is something that the guidance office puts together, gives us a sense of whether there are APs offered, if you're an international baccalaureate school, or even if there's a specific progression of humanities courses that students must take from 9th through 12th grade. If you're limited at that school and can only take 2 years of a language, we get that information through the school profile so that when we're looking at the transcript, it sort of serves as a little bit of our key or our crib notes as we're making sense of that. And then all schools, many schools, I guess I should say, offer a school-specific supplemental application. And this is where you may get additional questions, such as what are you hoping to major in, or what extracurriculars are you most interested in? And they often will have an additional essay. And this typically will be an essay where you're asked to speak more specifically about why you are applying to the particular school. This is my bias. I think Bowdoin's supplemental essay question is wonderful. We ask you to reflect on what's called the offer of the college. This is something that was written by our 7th president back in the early 1900s, and it's a poem of everything you will get out of a Bowdoin education. And we ask students to pick a line from that and reflect on it. So my one message here is those supplemental essays can really build up if you are applying to multiple schools. And this is not something that should be waited to work on until the last minute. So think about what those are and maybe try drafting them earlier in the admissions process as opposed to later. So every other school may decide that there are additional ways to learn more about a student outside of that common application and then the supplemental. Just as a few examples, interviews. Bowdoin is a school that provides optional interviews, and this will be available for rising seniors in beginning June 1st. So at the end of your junior year, you can elect to do an interview with a rising senior at Bowdoin or a staff member, either virtually or in person. And then starting September 1st, we offer the opportunity to interview with an alumni in your local area. So you should look on different websites for the schools that you're interested in to see if interviews are either required or an optional part of that. There often are supplements that a student is welcome to submit. At Bowdoin, we take advantage of art supplements. So for students who have had extensive experience in music, dance, theater, creative writing, or painting or ceramics, we invite you to submit an art supplement, and this will be sent off to faculty in those art departments who will go ahead and do a review and then provide a quick overview analysis of what that supplement looked like, and it gets added to your application. I know some schools will also receive maker portfolios or some other project that may be considered part of the application. Some schools will welcome a research paper or a presentation. So this, again, it's important as you're looking. I think many schools have their website set up of how to apply, and you will see all of the required as well as the optional pieces. But just to give you a bigger sense of what some of the optional or additional materials might be. I think Bowdoin was one of the first schools, and we did this maybe about 6 years ago, to offer a video response. This is something that I think is wonderful for some students to do, and other students are terrified just by the idea. And so I always like to emphasize that it's optional, but you will be given a question. If you go back into your portal after applying, you have about 30 seconds to think of the response to that question, and then up to 2 minutes to respond and give your answer to the question that's really geared towards understanding more of who you are as a person, as opposed to quizzing you on the battles in the Civil War or some math theorem. We are not trying to be another exam for you, but really a chance to see more about who you are as a person. So a timeline. Here we are, winter of junior year. It probably seems way too early to be thinking about this, but we appreciate the many of you who are out there now trying to figure out how to begin this process. As we look to this spring, I think it's always helpful, as Sarah mentioned earlier, to try to identify some schools that you might be able to visit. Make lists, do the research online to get a sense of the types of schools. Use those FISC guide and all the rest to make lists, to find when virtual information sessions or chats with students are happening. If you're in an area and want to be able to do an in-person visit, try to schedule those as it works. I think it's important also, as you're making those lists, to start thinking about all of the different requirements. So you might put colleges on one axis and the different requirements on another, so that, for instance, you know all of the essays that you might be working on down the line. Whether you're starting that in your spring of your junior year, just keep that tool in the back of your mind. I think sometimes this process with so many different requirements can be a little bit overwhelming, and this is just a good way to orient and organize yourself. I always say to juniors that as you're going about your daily life this spring and summer and a great topic comes to mind, just keep a running list of possible essay topics. It will serve you well, as opposed to getting to, October when you feel as though you need to come up with the perfect topic and really feel as though you're struggling to come up with an idea. And identify those teachers or other adults who might be good to ask for recommendations, and maybe even ask them before the end of the junior year. I know a lot of teachers and counselors try to get a start on their letters over the summer. And so for students who are able to ask them early, they may want to get a list of activities or some description from that student to help them as they're writing that letter, to just add to everything they already know. And then you have the summer, and this is a great time, if possible, to do more visits, whether it's in person or virtual. If it makes sense to try to do an interview, whether that's an official interview at the campus or virtually through the campus, or a more casual conversation with someone who's attended, who you might be able to get a sense of what their experience was like. And again, if you have a little bit extra time over the summer to begin drafting those essays, it will put you in a better place for the fall. And then August 1st is typically the date where a lot of those applications open up. So it's the first time you can go in and register, for instance, with the Common Application. And if you so choose to go ahead and start entering your demographic information or your activities, to just begin that process, feel like you're starting senior year with a lot of that done, so that when you have your regular load of classes and extracurriculars, you're not feeling overwhelmed by having to start that from scratch. So a few final tips. I know email is not necessarily the thing that high school students want to engage with, but I think in this day and age, email still rules the day. So encourage your student to be checking their email frequently. I know sometimes students will set up a specific email for college just because we know how many emails are sent out there. But if that's what they do, make sure they're checking in on that. That matters as you get into the application process, and school may be notifying them that the application is incomplete, or they're reaching out to schedule an interview. It's just important to be checking your email. And again, institutions operate differently. Make sure you're clear on the requirements, the dates, and the expectations of schools, both that you're visiting and ones that you may end up applying to. And this next one, I think, is one of the most important to remember, and I hope you're getting a sense of it from Bowdoin, at least. Sarah and I are here tonight because we want to help, and we know this is an overwhelming process, and we encourage you to take advantage of the resources that we can be for you, to ask the questions, to send emails, to be in touch if there are things that are really confusing to you, because we know that it's not necessarily a smooth sailing landscape as you try to move through this. And finally, to encourage folks to take advantage of fee waivers, depending on the college and the programs to which you're applying, but those are often out there. So I think that is the final slide. So I will go ahead and see if we can get some questions. I know a few have been coming in.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump back in, Meg, as well. And we have about 10 minutes left at max, maybe a little bit less. And so I'm going to give Meg a second to take a look at some of the questions as well. And I think what we're going to do is just sort of popcorn back and forth, grabbing the ones that we can to try to answer them quickly. So while Meg is taking a peek at some of them, and Meg, I know there's a number about art supplements that I may encourage you to take a look at and see, because Meg handles the art supplements for our office. There was a question that I was going to go ahead and try to just give some quick thoughts on, and that is a question about that came in that reads, there was a question above about showing demonstrated interest. What are your thoughts about students emailing their territory manager in your office? Do you get tons of emails, and is that annoying? As most questions my son had after his visit can be found online, questioning whether that is necessary and how you view that, and showing a student is really interested in Bowdoin College. So it's a great question. And it's a question that we frequently get. So what I would say is, the person who wrote this wrote it really perfectly. It's sort of, if it is a question that can be answered online, we encourage the student to use the resources available to them to try to find the answers necessary. If they have a question that they aren't finding the answer to, we always welcome that. We, again, as Meg said, we want to be helpful. We are available. We do like to get to know students. We're happy to hear from you. It is something that, we always encourage if there are specific questions about things, or if you just want to introduce yourself or you want to say something, we are always welcome. The more we know about a person, the more helpful it is as we look at their application materials, the more that we get a chance to kind of get to know your student. We're excited about that. So understanding, sort of using it as a way to get your questions answered is always welcome. But it doesn't need to be effusive over the top all the time, I would say.
Great. So I'll just jump in. We have a couple questions here about arts. Can you submit more than one art supplement? And can you submit a art supplement if you have done a lot of art, but know that you want to be pre-med, for instance? So at Bowdoin, we welcome multiple supplements if you are someone who has done arts at a high level, and you may be a dancer and you may also be a singer. And if you are interested in showing that part of yourself, we encourage you to do that. In regards to submitting an supplement, if you don't intend to major in it, at Bowdoin, we welcome that because we have so many extracurriculars. And I think this is one of the wonderful things about a small liberal arts college. You could be a biology major and be taking classes in the music department and singing in an a cappella group and playing with an ensemble. And so there are different ways that those supplements can help both in looking at people in the major, but also giving a sense of whether you could be a good contributor to the different ensembles and groups on campus.
Great. So there's a question here that says, is there a disadvantage in applying as an undecided major, or is there a difference? The great thing about a liberal arts college is that you actually don't come in with a major. So even if you are absolutely positive that you want to major in sociology, psychology, or whatever it is, you actually will come into a school like Bowdoin and take a breadth of courses over the first 2 years of your time in the college. And so Bowdoin has a series of distribution requirements that a student is able to take that purposely sort of encourages engagement across the full curriculum. So we have distribution requirements in 5 different areas. We ask students to take one course in each of those 5 areas during their first 2 years. After they have had a chance to do that, then they will be able to declare their major in the spring of their sophomore year. So all students actually come in undecided officially, and then are able to decide after their first 2 years what they choose to study in their final 2 years.
I see a question here about submitting SAT scores. Are they required to submit all results if taken more than once? So this is often referred to as super scoring. And so we are looking to benefit the student in the way that we can. So if you have multiple sittings of an SAT and you did really well in math on one and verbal on the other, you're going to be asked to submit the full scores for multiple seatings, but we are going to look at your best score. So we are super scoring it, taking the best math and the best verbal, and we're going to look at it that way.
There's a question about the senior interviews or the interview opportunity. It is an optional part of our application. So if a student is interested in taking part in an interview, they can sign up online, and it can be either an in-person interview or a virtual interview. Each student is granted one interview opportunity. So it is not something that a student can choose, or an applicant can choose to interview with a senior interviewer and then a staff member and then an alum. It is just one interview. It's it's a 30-minute interview, and it's really, the interview is meant to actually just be a conversation. It's not meant to be an interrogation or anything else. It's meant to be a way for you to learn more, your student to learn more about Bowdoin, and to talk to someone who is closely connected to the community, and for us to get to have a chance to get to know your student a little bit more. It's really meant to be a fairly informal process, and as I said, it is optional. So the interviews will take place either in person or virtually, and they take place either with a senior interviewer who actually does the bulk of our interviews. We hire a wonderful team of seniors during the course of their fall semester in order to help with the interviews. So they actually do the bulk of them. Plus the fact it's also really fun for students for applicants to hear directly from the student experience. So they do a lot of them. Staff will do them. We often do them on the road as well if we're traveling to a particular territory or area. And then alumni also fill in and help out tremendously by doing interviews either in person or virtually. That's helpful.
Just want to add to that because I saw a question later. You can't do both a student interview and an alum interview. So if you've registered for a student interview, you won't have access to the alum because we just see it, they're seen as equal. So it's really more about which one you've chosen. I see a question here, and I'm glad you asked it because I meant to say this in the testing section. If a student does not submit a score, won't the school just assume it is lower than the reported average for the school? So one thing we have observed is that the scores continue to go up. I mean, right now, those scores that we are seeing are so incredibly high when I think about where we were a decade ago. And I think it's because obviously with optional testing, those who have done the best are submitting the scores. And so the reported average or the median, the 25 to 75% scores are much, much higher than we appreciate that all students have. And so we are not looking at students who don't submit a score and assuming the worst. We are looking at it in much more of an advantage based and saying the student has done better in the classroom and knows that they're a really strong writer. And that's what they want us to see about their academic potential. And we are not spending time trying to think about what their score might have been if they had taken it. We also appreciate that some students really haven't even had the opportunity to take a test based on just the logistics and the availability in their particular area.
There's a question that I want to answer just very quickly, which is, does Bowdoin give preference to Maine residents? So what percentage of students are in-state residents versus out of state? So this is near and dear to my heart because I am the territory manager for all of Maine that is not York and Cumberland County. My colleague Kat covers York and Cumberland County. Bowdoin enjoys, and it's one of the things I love most about being part of this school, is that Bowdoin enjoys a really deep commitment to students from Maine. So we have 10% of our student population at Bowdoin are students from Maine. And we don't give preference. All admissions policies are the same and all admission standards are the same across the boards, but we do love our Maine students very, very much.
I see a question about AP classes and the limitations at your school. If the school limits the number of AP classes, how does the college know our schools do this? We are a very small school. So the school profile will provide that. And oftentimes it's also on the transcript or as part of the school report. It will say that one of the questions for the counselor to answer, is there a limit on the number of APs a student can take each year? So we see a variety. Some schools will say you're only allowed to take 3, and some schools may have no limit. So we know that that's different school to school. And at Bowdoin, and I think at many schools, we read geographically. Sarah just mentioned her Maine territories. And so we really get to know the schools in our territories over the years and have an understanding for what is possible from an academic standpoint, what the classroom options are for particular students.
Okay. It is 9 o'clock and we have to wrap up, unbelievably. It's very, very quick. So on behalf of Meg and myself and all of our colleagues here at Bowdoin, we really appreciate the time that you've given us tonight. We hope it's been helpful to you. You can always visit the Meet Our Team webpage on the Bowdoin Admissions website in order to find our contact information. There's only one Meg and only one Sarah in the office. It's us. If you have follow-up questions or anything that we weren't able to get to, we apologize for that we weren't able to get to all of these questions. There are 48 of them open right now that we're trying really hard to answer. But thanks so much for your time. I hope you have a great evening. Take care, and thanks again.